good morning, everybody. A Fox News alert now. Tough questions being asked this morning about a meeting between President Obama and the head of the Congressional Budget Office, that's the CBO. Fox News learning that the president ordered Doug Elmendorf to come to the White House yesterday morning, and now critics are asking, is the White House trying to silence the one voice in the health care debate that's supposed to be free of political influence? We'll explain his position. Makes you go, a little bit here. Good morning, I'm Bill Hemmer. Welcome to America's Newsroom.
Hi, Bill. Hi, everybody. I'm Megyn Kelly, and we are waiting for a reaction from key Republicans on this developing story. Again, Doug Elmendorf runs the CBO. The job of that agency is to give Congress nonpartisan estimates of what legislation might cost. Now, this guy reports to Congress, not to the White House. And he dropped a bomb on the president's health care push last Thursday when he made this statement in front of a Senate hearing.
No, Mr. Chairman. In the legislation that has been reported, we do not see the sort of fundamental changes that would be necessary to reduce the trajectory of federal health spending by a significant amount. And on the contrary, the legislation significantly expands the federal responsibility for health care costs.
And right when that statement came out, the headlines rippled across this entire debate. 4 days after that statement was made, right before the big primetime news conference later tonight, the president calls the guy to the Oval Office. The question is why? What did they talk about? John Funn, columnist for the Wall Street Journal, has covered the White House for years. He's our leading reporter this morning. John, good morning to you. What are you to make of this?
Well, I think it was probably an appropriate meeting, but I don't think it was an attempt to silence Mr. Elmendorf. I think perhaps at best it was an attempt to soften him up. He himself, Mr. Elmendorf, said in his blog how excited he was to meet the president in the Oval Office, the majesty of the situation. So I think that the president was not properly following the separation of powers. Congressional Budget Office is completely independent. He should have perhaps gone through his budget director, Peter Orszag, if he wanted to get a briefing from the CBO. After all, Peter Orszag used to run the Congressional Budget Office until last year,
now,
and he certainly would have been able to do that. That's
an interesting point. What many viewers may not realize, the White House has its own budget office.
Oh, yes. In fact, Congress set up the Congressional Budget Office only in the 1970s after it had a lot of disputes with the executive branch about not having its own independent analysis. What really does trouble me, however, is members of Congress who hire the Congressional Budget Office to do this nonpartisan office, I think have been leaning on the CBO. Senator Max Baucus, who's the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, last month lectured Douglas Elmendorf about how whether or not the CBO was really on board with health care reform. He basically said, look, you know, you're just doing all this number crunching, but shouldn't you be along to help us with this effort? And I think that that, plus other phone conversations that I know members of Congress have had with CBO analysts, does trouble me. Because Congress set up the CBO to be completely separated from politics, even though the CBO director is a political appointee.
The CBO set up to figure out whether or not the laws that Congress is passing are going to work or not. I mean, that's their job, essentially. We reached out to Dana Perino, Tony Fratto, spokespersons for the previous administration. They say it never happened under the Bush years. Others are calling this highly unusual. You wonder why Elmendorf would even take the meeting.
Well, the President of the United States calls you up and says, I'd like to see you in the Oval Office. It's hard to say no. But remember, the controversy, the outrage that happened when Vice President Dick Cheney went over to the CIA before the Iraq invasion and said, please explain to me your intelligence estimates. A lot of CIA analysts said that was an indirect attempt to intimidate them, and there was outrage over that. But remember, the CIA is part of the executive branch. Vice President Cheney had every right to do that. This is crossing separation of powers lines. This is the President of the United States calling an independent Congressional Budget Office director across town saying, please tell me what you're doing. And it can't help but have had an effect on him. So if it was an outrage under Vice President Cheney, it should be at least a question of concern today.
That's why we're covering it today. John Funn, thank you from the Wall Street Journal here in New York. We're all